Often in our lives, we start off a new relationship talking with a stranger. On side one, I talked about the importance of making good first impressions when I gave you some effective openers and closers. On this side, I'll show you how to get off on the right foot with strangers. To do that, you must always be able to make a good first impression. You see, making a good first impression is more than half the job of getting what you want from a total stranger. The way you strike people at your first meeting will often decide how they're going to react to you for a long time to come. If you rub a person the wrong way the first time you meet him, it could take months or even years to correct that initial bad impression he has of you. And it could be that you never will be able to change his bad attitude toward you. Your first few words are more important than the next several thousand. For instance, suppose you have a mean, "I hate the whole world" look on your face the first time you meet a person. No matter how many times you see him after that, he'll always remember that first bad impression he had of you. He'll continually think of you as an old sourpuss with a miserable outlook on life. For example, I was talking with Scott Kennedy the other morning at the Chamber of Commerce breakfast. Another person, a local businessman, I'll just call him John, joined us in small talk for a few minutes. After he left, Scott said, "I can't stand that man. He's got a rotten temper, treats his help horribly." I was astonished at Scott's remark, and I said, "I don't understand that at all, Scott. I've known John for a long time now. He's one of the most pleasant, good-natured fellows in the whole town. I've never seen him lose his temper or heard him raise his voice in anger in all the years that I've known him." "Well, all I know is, I went into his store one time," Scott replied, "and he was chewing out one of his clerks up by the cash register in front of all the customers. He was really raising Cain. He was all red-faced and yelling like crazy. He didn't even have the courtesy to reprimand his employee in private." "I'm really surprised to hear that, Scott," I said. "It sure doesn't sound like John at all. Something really bad must have happened to cause him to act that way that one time. I know it had to be an exception because he's one of the most even-tempered and kindest men I've ever known." "Maybe so," Scott said, "but I've never gone back to his store since then, and I'm not going to. Once was enough for me. I've absolutely no use for employers who use their positions to mistreat and degrade people the way he did." Well, actually, I do happen to know that John is one of the most patient, kind, considerate, and thoughtful employers that I've ever met. He goes out of his way to be decent to his help. I also know that he has made several interest-free loans to some of his employees to help them get their children through college, but unfortunately, he had lost his temper that one time that Scott saw him, and Scott's first impression of John was a lasting one. So, it's highly important for you to know how to make the right impression on people the first time. I'd like to use the rest of this side to give you 6 valuable techniques to get off on the right foot with strangers. By using them, you'll be able to influence their attitudes and actions positively and control the conversation for your benefit from the very beginning. Now let's discuss the first technique, how to tactfully strike up a conversation with a complete stranger. A friend of mine, Ron, can strike up a conversation as easily as you or I might talk with a long-time friend. I've studied his methods for a long time, for I've often felt I could use some of his gifted techniques myself. What's Ron's secret? He appeals to the person's ego. He makes that person feel as if he or she were the most important person in the whole wide world. Here are just a few of the many conversation openers that Ron uses. "How do you manage to keep such a calm and serene attitude toward life with the hectic business pressures you have to put up with every day?" "I've never met a minister I didn't enjoy talking with. Could you tell me more about your particular faith?" "I've never seen such attractive earrings before. Could you tell me where I might get a pair like them for my wife?" I've never met an educator I didn't enjoy talking with, for I always learn something more. Could you tell me more about your particular specialty? There's no limit to the list of conversation openers you can use. You can use the ones Ron uses, or you can use the ones I gave you on side 1, or better still, you can make up your own to fit the particular situation you find yourself in. The only guidance you need follow is to use a leading question to get the person to talk about himself and his own self-interests. This is a guaranteed way to get an individual, even a total stranger, to open up and talk with you. Simply concentrate your attention on what he's interested in, not what you're interested in. Always feed the person's ego. Make him feel important, and you'll never go wrong. It's one of the best ways in the world to strike up a conversation with a total stranger and feel perfectly at ease while doing so. Now let me give you the second technique so you can see how you can use it to take control of the conversation immediately. You see, when two people meet for the first time, one will automatically become the leader and assume control of the conversation. The other person will then become the follower. You can always take control if you'll simply remember that everyone in the world is waiting for someone else to tell him what to do. So, let that someone be you. You'll find that this amazing strategy will put even a total stranger under your control immediately. All you need do is take the initiative, and you will instantly have the momentum on your side. If you adopt a positive attitude and assume that the other person is going to do what you want him to do, you'll find that 95% of the time he will carry out your request or your command without hesitation or question. In only 5% of cases, all he needs is a little extra push. One of the best examples I've ever seen of this technique is this story a friend of mine, Sandra Crawford, told me.
There was a car accident out in the country. Several cars had stopped to look, but no one tried to help. Then another car stopped, and the man who got out took charge of the situation immediately. He first checked the occupants of both cars and found that the only person seriously hurt was a woman. Her face had been badly cut, one arm had been broken, she was bleeding and in shock. Since this was the dead of winter and it was icy cold, shock was doubly dangerous. The man checked to make sure she had had no spinal injuries that would keep her from being moved. Then he turned and gave a series of rapid-fire orders to the people standing around looking on. You, go in that house and call an ambulance and the highway patrol. You there, go with him. Bring back 2 blankets to cover her with and a sheet or anything we can use to immobilize her arm. The 2 of you over there, go find something we can use to carry this woman into the house to get her out of this freezing weather. Get a folding cot, some boards, a door, anything that will support her weight. You 2, go down the road to the south and slow down traffic. You 2 go up the road to the north and do the same thing. We don't want another accident to happen. The rest of you, get in your cars and leave right now. In only a few moments, where before that had been only confusion, there was now order and organization, all because one man took control of the situation.
So that's the first thing for you to keep in mind. If you have the courage to make decisions and then accept responsibility for your actions, you'll find that people will always gladly defer to you. You'll be surrounded by an aura of command and authority that, even though invisible, is still so easily recognizable you can almost touch it. People will automatically look to you for leadership whenever a problem arises. Just remember that other people will always accept you at your own appraisal of yourself. You are more responsible for how people accept you than anyone else. A lot of people worry about what other persons think of them. You can rid yourself of that unwarranted fear if you'll just remember that you are not responsible for what other people think of you. You are responsible only for what you think of yourself. Others form their opinions of you based upon the opinion that you have of yourself. You see, if you act like a nobody and put yourself down, then others will treat you like a nobody and put you down too. But if you act like somebody with authority, people will treat you that way. It is a truism that a person can have whatever allowances or liberties he takes without opposition. Take the role of leader, seize control of the conversation, and others will immediately concede to you. This fact is well illustrated by the following true story a friend of mine told me. He was a draftee in World War II and was inducted into the service at Jefferson Barracks, St. Louis, Missouri.
When the group I was inducted with shipped out, for some reason or other, I was left behind. When the next group of draftees came into my barracks, they assumed immediately that I was an old-timer in the service, and I let them think that. I had them scrubbing floors, cleaning out the latrines, and policing the grounds outside the barracks while I supervised their work, most of the time from my bunk. It wasn't until the next group of draftees shipped out, and I was one of them, that they discovered that I had no rank, but that I was a private just like them.
Jack did exactly what I suggested to you. He assumed the role of a leader by seizing control of the situation, and everyone immediately did as he wanted them to do. How would you like to get superior service from a waitress in a restaurant or a clerk in a store? The third technique will teach you how to do that. One of the deepest desires every person has is the need to be important, the craving to be appreciated. Every time you deal with a stranger, you can fulfill that deep craving with a few words that won't cost you a single penny. Just pay the other person an unexpected compliment of some sort. I know you've heard me say this several times before, but I can't repeat it too often. For the desire to be important is considered by psychologists to be one of the top 2 driving forces that motivate people to do what they do. Let me give you an example of this technique now. Whenever I go into a restaurant, I make it a point to compliment my waitress in some way. Just the other morning, the one who brought my water and menu seemed grouchy and out of sorts. I was determined to change her attitude at once. "What a lovely fragrance you're wearing," I said. "You certainly make an old man feel young and lively again." Her face brightened immediately, and a smile appeared in place of her frown. "Thank you," she said. "That's the kindest thing I've heard this morning." You can be sure my eggs were done just the way I wanted them, over medium well, not too soft, not too hard, just right. There was extra jelly on my toast, and my coffee cup was constantly filled without my asking, all because I had paid her a simple compliment and made her feel important. I always make it a point to find out my waiter or waitress's name immediately. It keeps me from having to say, "Hey, you." And as I'll tell you in just a moment, a person's name is the most important word in the world to him or her. So always make it a point to find out the name of your waitress or waiter, or the clerk in a store who's waiting on you. It'll surely pay you dividends, and that's for sure. Have you ever wanted to get up close so you could see the show better in a nightclub? The same technique will get you the same results as a $20 bill, but it'll cost you absolutely nothing. My wife and I were standing in a long line waiting for the dinner show at the Flamingo, one of those fabulous Las Vegas clubs. The maitre d' was strolling up and down the long line looking at the guests. He was handsomely dressed in dinner clothes and had a magnificent beard, the kind that only a few people like Hemingway, Kenny Rogers, or Chris Christopherson can wear well. "I wish I could grow a beard that looks as handsome as yours does," I said to him. "I've always wanted to grow one, but I've never had the courage. I've had to content myself with my salt and pepper mustache." "Why are you standing back here in line when you have a reservation for a front table?" he asked with a sly wink. "Come up here where you should be, and I'll seat you and your lady immediately." Paying an unexpected compliment will even work to melt the icy and haughty manner of an imperious government bureaucrat, and that's the closest thing to a miracle I have ever seen. Now, in the fourth technique, I want to tell you how you can get a complete stranger to go out of his way to help you. If you want to get a person you've never met before do whatever you ask him to do, then say something that will let him know at once that he is superior to you in some way. The plain truth is that every person you meet feels he is better than you in one way or another. A sure way to his heart is letting him know that you recognize that superiority. All you need do is ask a person for his advice, his opinion, or his help, and he'll go out of his way to assist you. I can well recall the time I went into a bait and tackle shop in Florida to buy my first saltwater fishing gear. I simply didn't know how or where to begin. The clerk was busy with several other customers, so he couldn't help me immediately. I lifted one rod after another out of the rack only to put it back. Then I looked at lines and hooks and weights, but I didn't know what to pick up or put down. I noticed a man on my left watching me sympathetically. "Would you help me out and give me some advice?" I asked. "I've never done any surf fishing before, and I simply don't know how or where to start." "Sure, let me give you a hand," he said. "I've got an hour before I go back to work. I'll be glad to show you what to buy and, just as important, what not to buy." "Well, I don't like to bother you," I said. "I don't want to burn up your lunch hour for you, but I sure could use some advice from an expert." "Don't worry about my lunch hour," he said. "I need to lose a few pounds anyway. The important thing is to get you fixed up with the right kind of fishing tackle." He proceeded to tell me all about the differences in the various kinds of fishing rods. Then he showed me the type he used and recommended the same kind for me. After that, he selected the reel and showed me how to put it on the rod. Then came the correct hooks, the right weights, line, leader, a pair of fishing pliers, a scaler, a fish filleting knife. He spent nearly an hour with me. We'd completed my shopping, and he was showing me how to assemble it all when he glanced at his watch. "Well, I think you're all set now," he said. "I'm sorry I have to leave, but I must get back to work." "I really appreciate your help," I said. "I don't know what I'd have done without you. But I'm afraid I've used up your entire lunch hour. I'm sorry." "Forget it," he said. "I'm just glad I was here and that I could help you out." If you'll just be willing to admit that people can be superior to you in some way and then ask them for their help, you will find that a tremendous number of benefits will come your way. Here are some specific phrases you can use to get the results you want. "Can you help me out with this, please?" "Could I ask you for your advice?" "What's your opinion on this?" "I value your judgment on this matter." "Could you please show me how to do this?" "I know you're an expert in this field. Could you give me a few tips?" These phrases, and others like them, will help you strike up a conversation with a total stranger and feel completely at ease about it. Every man is my superior in one way or another, and in that I learn from him. If you'll just remember this idea, you'll have no trouble at all in putting this technique to work. Now, in the fifth technique, I want to give you 3 surefire ways to make friends with a total stranger. First of all, remember that it's ever so easy to strike up a conversation with a total stranger and make friends with him or her if you'll just get your mind off yourself and what you want and concentrate on what the other person is interested in. There are any number of conversation openers you can use to control the situation and get the other person to talk. But the 3 I've found to be the most effective are, in the order of their importance, a person's name, his vocation, and his hobby. Let me show you what I mean. A friend of mine, Harry Bellows, is district sales manager for a large wholesale nursery house. His company had been trying for months to win a certain large retail account from a man named Peter Manoski. More than a half dozen salespeople had called on this gentleman, but without results. Finally, the president called Harry in and asked him to have a go at it.
The first thing I did was to check with each salesman. Each one told me the same thing. Mr. Minoski was really touchy about how his name was pronounced and how it was spelled. So I went down to the library to find the exact ethnic derivation of the name Minoski. Then I went calling on him. As soon as I was ushered into his office, I said, "I've been anxious to meet you for a long time, Mr. Minoski. You see, I've always been interested in the ethnic derivation of names. It's sort of a hobby of mine. I know your name's Slovakian in origin, but I haven't been able to find out exactly what it means. I know your first name, Peter, means reliable and dependable, but the library's not able to give me the meaning of your last name. Can you tell me?" Mr. Minoski glared at me and said, "How do you know I'm Slovak? How do you know I'm not Polish? All your salespeople seem to think so." "Because your name is spelled with the suffix SKY, I said. "If your name were Polish, it would be spelled with SKI. "By golly, you're a pretty smart fellow," Mr. Minoski said. "I think I'd like to do business with you." He then talked for more than an hour about his family's origin, his father's native country, his children and grandchildren, his hobbies and interests. I listened patiently and benefited. I left that day with the biggest order we'd ever received from a retail nursery. He's been our steady customer ever since that day.
Now, I myself am just as touchy about my own name as Mr. Minoski is. Mine is of Dutch origin. My parental grandparents came to this country from Rotterdam, Holland in 1870. All my ancestors are Holland Dutch, not German, and I dislike being thought of as being of German origin just as much as Mr. Minoski disliked being called Polish. We may all be United States citizens, but we still have a feeling of original ethnic pride about our names. The second surefire way to make friends with a total stranger is to let him tell you what he does for a living. All you need to say is something like this: "I've always been interested in your profession. Would you tell me something about your position and the work you do?" This is usually enough to keep the other person going for half an hour or more. In fact, you might end up feeling as I did when I asked a young computer programmer to explain his work to me. He told me so much about computers, I thought I was going to drown in technical terminology. I felt about like my father did when he used to say that the preacher said more than he had to talk about. If this happens to you, you must be patient. Remember, your purpose is to control the situation and guide the conversation for your eventual benefit. The third surefire way to make friends with a total stranger is to ask him to tell you about his hobby. Most people have an avocation of some sort, be it hunting, fishing, bowling, golf, gardening, music, whatever. In a great many cases, people are as expert, sometimes even more so, in their avocations as they are in their professions. And you can be sure of one thing: they always like to talk about their hobbies. I have a neighbor, a pharmacist by profession, a botanist by avocation. Bill is a walking botanical encyclopedia. He can give a person valuable free advice about plants, shrubs, trees, vines, and everything else that grows. Bill can look at a plant or a shrub and tell you if it needs iron, magnesium, has too much water, not enough water, whatever. All you need do to become his number one friend is to ask him something about his hobby. The sixth technique is about how you can control the attitudes and emotions of complete strangers. If you will remember, when you studied physics or chemistry, you found that positive attracted negative, like went with unlike, and acid neutralized alkali. But this doesn't hold true when you're learning how to get along with people. When you're dealing with human beings, just the opposite is true. Like always attracts like. Let me show you exactly what I mean by that. Be kind to others, and they will be kind to you. Be mean to others, and they will be mean to you. Be courteous to others, and they will be courteous to you. Well, you get the idea. Now, as I told you earlier on this side, whenever two people are involved in a relationship, one will become the leader, the other will become the follower. If you assume the position of leadership, as you should, the attitudes and emotions of others will depend entirely upon your attitude and your emotions. The power you have over others and the ability to master and control their emotions and their actions by your own emotions and actions is enormous. In dealing with others, then, you will always see your own attitude reflected back in the other person's behavior. It's almost as if you were looking at yourself in a mirror. When you smile, the person in the mirror smiles back at you. When you frown, the person in the mirror frowns back at you. Let me give you a simple example of this technique. Take my own granddaughter, Dara Nicole, for instance. When I smile at her, she's happy, and she smiles back at me. But if I frown the least little bit, or if I act irritated and impatient about something, she gets a worried look on her face, and she says, "Are you mad at me, Grandpa?" Then I'll smile back at her, and I reply, "No, of course I'm not mad. Are you?" A look of relief and joy comes over her face. She smiles and says, "Nope, I'm not mad either. I'm happy." Well, you don't have to say a single word to influence another person. Smiles and frowns are both contagious. It's all up to you how you want to infect the other person. His attitude and actions will depend entirely on your attitude and your actions. So, if you've been afraid to strike up a conversation with a complete stranger, practice the 6 techniques I've given you here for a few weeks. You'll be amazed at the fantastic results you'll get. Now, to refresh your memory, let me review these 6 techniques for you here. 1. To tactfully strike up a conversation with a complete stranger, ask him a leading question so he will talk about his own self-interests. 2. Take control of the conversation immediately by assuming the leadership role. Remember that everyone in the world is waiting for someone else to tell them what to do. 3. To get superior service from a waitress, a waiter, a clerk, even a haughty government bureaucrat, pay that person an unexpected and sincere compliment. And always be sure to learn the person's name so you don't have to say, "Hey, you." 4. To get a complete stranger to go out of his way to help you, let him know at once that he is superior to you in some way. 5. 3 surefire ways to make friends with a total stranger are, first, remember that a person's name is his most personal possession. It is the most important word in all the world to him. Be sure you spell it correctly and pronounce it properly. Second, let the person tell you all about what he does for a living. Let him give you all the details. And third, have a person tell you about his hobby. Ask him questions to draw him out if he's hesitant. And the 6th technique? You can control the attitudes, emotions, and actions of complete strangers by your own attitude, emotions, and actions. Remember that a smile always wins a smile in return, but that a frown always begets a frown. If you'll practice these 6 techniques and use them constantly, you'll soon find that your fear of talking with strangers will vanish. You'll develop the confidence you need to feel completely at ease and comfortable when talking to a total stranger. Just remember that a stranger is a friend you haven't met yet, and it will make your job that much easier for you. On the next 4 sides, we'll talk about some specific business situations and how you can use your conversation power to gain the upper hand.